the North Texas Council Vetting Committee for the Texas Railroad Commission. We have with us today candidate Al Lee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We will now introduce the North Texas Council Vetting Committee members for the Texas Railroad Commission.
Gordon Edwards of Villa, Texas.
And Brad Boyd, Midlothian, Texas.
And Liz Moser Garland. I'm going to, what?
Hi.
Hi. I'm going to read aloud the simple rules. No one is allowed to be in the room except the vetting panel and candidate. All electronics allowed in the room shall be turned off except laptops used by the vetting committee and the video recorders provided by the vetting committee. Cell phones or voice recorders shall be turned off in the room. No written material or notes will be taken by the candidate. North Texas Council vetting panel members and candidate agree that all questions and responses at this vetting session are to remain confidential property until videos are uploaded and considered public information on the North Texas Council website and or alternate websites. Verbal questions will be asked and verbal responses to those questions will be given with 2 minutes per response.
Okay.
There will not be any follow-up questions or explanation of the questions during this video session. You may, however, request a repeat of a question at the time the question was first asked during this video.
Okay.
And that's it. Again, this is Texas Railroad Commission candidate Al Lee is with us today. Please start us off with a 2-minute introduction of yourself and why you are running.
Okay, very quickly, my name is Al Lee. I'm running for the unexpired term of Texas Railroad Commissioner. And I am a United States Air Force Vietnam-era veteran. I have been a conservative political activist all my life, since Ronald Reagan's original presidential campaign. I was invited to and attended Ronald Reagan's inaugural ball in 1981, and I've been helping conservative candidates and causes since that time. The reason that I'm running for Railroad Commissioner is because I believe that America is under attack and Texas is the #1 target, and I believe that regulations by federal agencies are the #1 weapon that's being used, and the Railroad Commission happens to be the #1 first line of defense for Texas against those regulations. Most candidates recognize this and they will talk about defeating this regulation or that regulation, and that sounds really good, except that when the federal government is able to create tens of thousands of new regulations in a year, fighting them one by one can't possibly win that war. So more aggressive candidates will say they're going to eliminate the EPA or Department of Energy or some other agency, and that sounds really good. But it still can't win the war when the federal government is able to create a new agency or a czarship on a whim. I think that in order to solve this problem, what you've got to do is go higher and determine the source of the problem, and that's called administrative law. And I intend to fight for reform of administrative law, and this is something that can only be done by states because the powers of the federal government are granted by the states. And there is a constitutional problem when the federal government has its boundary of jurisdiction and it can create an agency within itself that is not limited by those boundaries. And I believe that we can, on a constitutional basis, challenge that authority. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to go ahead and start with the questions. You have 2 minutes to answer each of the following 10 questions.
Okay.
Please state your views on the role of government at local, state, or federal levels.
It's an interesting question. #1, I believe that government is best when it's closest to the people. I believe that there is a role for a federal government, but the role of the federal government is limited, and that was what the intention of the founding fathers. The idea was that issues can be handled best by government closest to the people. So, for instance, a city or a municipal government can handle local issues a lot better than the federal government can, and even better than the state can. What that brings up is the issue of the federal government usurping powers from lower levels, especially state powers. And I intend to fight against that because I intend to move, as much as I can, move the federal government out of its role of micromanaging the affairs of Texas and of counties and cities in order to get control of pretty much everything down to the lowest possible level, because I think that's where the best government happens. The most obvious example in the case of Railroad Commissioner would be EPA versus TCEQ. TCEQ is the Texas agency that does the corresponding function of EPA, and I believe that it can much better handle those functions. And the main reason is that it will be sensitive to Texas issues and Texas interests, whereas EPA is being used as a political tool, and in many cases I believe is being used against Texas. As I said in my introduction, I believe Texas is the #1 target of the left, and I think that these rules are being used to actually to harm Texas industry, our energy production and our oil and mining operations.
Thank you. Question number 2. News media such as ABC News and Oil and Gas Lawyer Blog have reported that the Texas Sunset Commission staff report that recommends the concept of replacing 3 elected members of the Texas Railroad Commission with 5 non-elected members. What are your thoughts?
I totally disagree with that. As a matter of fact, one of the problems that we have is that in certain cases, the governor is able to assign somebody. For instance, when one of the railroad commissioners resigned in order to run for another office with his term unexpired, which is the term I'm running for, the governor is able to assign somebody and put them into this, which is a patronage assignment. The person that's put into that position then has all of the advantages of incumbency and may have absolutely no requirements. As a matter of fact, his qualification may have been that he raised a lot of money for, let's say, the governor. I am very opposed to patronage assignments. I think it's a massive problem throughout government because an assigned commissioner is nothing more than another bureaucrat who is not responsive to the people of the state and is really, in most cases, especially in this particular office, is using it only as a stepping stone to move on to something further. So I really disagree with the idea of appointing and assigning seats to people because it's going to be used. That's a tremendous amount of power that one politician has in order to repay his cronies. And I think if you look at the federal government today and see what's going on, Solyndra and all of these other issues, these crony relationships with powerful politicians don't work to our advantage. So I definitely am opposed to it. I like the idea that railroad commissioners should be elected. I really feel that the people of the state of Texas should be better informed about what the Railroad Commission is. The name is very deceptive. The name should be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question number 3, what issues are facing the Railroad Commission that the public needs to know about?
Oh, there are probably a lot of issues. The EPA and their regulations would be at the heart of almost all of it. And for instance, there is a cross-state air quality rule that says that if we use coal to produce electricity in Texas and Chicago says that some coal dust blew through the air and hit them, then we are responsible for it. They came up with a rule that says there can only be 1,000 pounds of carbon dioxide produced for every megawatt of electricity that is produced, and that is pretty much absurd. A coal-fired plant produces 18 times that, and they know that there is no way that we can reasonably bring them into compliance. That's not to say that I'm a proponent for more coal-fired plants, and the reason is that there is a better technology, and I believe that that is gas-fired combined cycle generation. And that's one of the things that I intend to propose is furthering the use of our own Texas resource, natural gas, which we have in huge abundance, in order to generate electricity for our state. But not only that, Texas has its own separate electric grid. If we produce electricity for our grid, we can actually sell that, and we have done that outside of the state, sell it to other states and to the national grid. And so I am a strong proponent of utilizing our own Texas natural resource, natural gas, which we have in huge abundance. We could produce electricity for the next 300 years with the gas that we know of today and the technology that we know today. And it eliminates the argument of the EPA regarding air quality for production and reduces the cost of our electricity. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 4, what work experience and or education do you have to apply to this position?
I've done a number of things. I've been an entrepreneur and started a number of different businesses. I do have some small holdings in energy production, but my most important work experience has been as a problem solver. That's what I did for most of my career, almost 40 years. And I would be hired by large companies after they failed to solve an identified problem that they had, sometimes spending $30–40 million trying to solve that problem. And then I would be hired and solve the problem. The reason I was very successful at that is not because I'm smarter than anybody else. It's because for some reason I have a different way of looking at a problem. For instance, what I told you in the introduction was the administrative law issue and these onerous regulations. Almost every other candidate that you hear for any office will talk about fighting the regulations, which are the symptom of the problem. Even the agencies themselves are the symptom of the problem. The problem is administrative law, which is where the federal government granted powers that it does not possess to agencies to reach outside of the jurisdiction of the federal government according to the Constitution, and to make rules and regulations that have the force of law. You know, you can be fined, pay a monetary penalty, you can have your property taken away, you can go to jail for violating a rule that a bureaucrat thought up. Never been voted on, never been scrutinized, and it isn't within the constitutional powers of the federal government. And so, you know, probably the most valuable asset that I bring as far as my background is as a problem solver. I address problems differently from other people. One of the reasons is I look to the source of the problem, not the symptom. I don't flail away at the symptom. I determine what is the source, and I say, that's what we have to fix. Thanks.
Thank you.
Question number 5. How does the Texas Constitution provide for the Railroad Commission, and how does that office benefit society?
I can't remember the year. I think it was 1889 or so that the Railroad Commission was initially formed as the first regulatory agency in the state. And it was formed, the purpose was to regulate, as the name would imply, railroad fares, because there was a disparity between fares that were being charged for different people going different places, and that was the original intent. That no longer is under the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission. In fact, the Railroad Commission has nothing at all to do with railroads. The name still remains, oddly enough, but you know, the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with it. The most important function of the Railroad Commission always was when oil was initially discovered in Texas, and the railroads owned a tremendous amount, millions of acres of real estate. It started regulating the production of oil and then gas under that property. And it did it so well that it came to regulate all of the production of oil and gas throughout the state. Because Texas is different from other states, and whereas in most states, most of the oil producing land is owned by the federal government, in Texas that's not true, because Texas was originally a republic of its own. So most of the land that produces oil and gas in Texas is owned either privately or by the state. We are such a large resource and producer of this important energy, both oil and gas, that for quite a while, the Railroad Commission actually controlled worldwide oil prices. And I believe that we still are one of the most important sources in the world for energy, both oil and gas, and the Railroad Commission takes a very large role in managing that and in bringing us to independence from foreign oil.
Thank you. Number 6, what previous public office have you held, and list some of your accomplishments?
I have never held a previous public office. I have been a political activist, as I said, since 1980 in Ronald Reagan's campaign. I have helped candidates in Texas, in federal offices, in other states even, and so I've always been involved in politics, but I've never been a candidate myself, and that's usually because I had my own business interests to run, which, as I said, since it was based upon my own particular talent, I could not withdraw myself, from the business. The business would have to shut down. Even though I had other employees, most of our operations I was integrally involved with them. So that's why I've never, even though I've always been interested in politics, I've never been a candidate for any office before. So I really can't talk about my experience as a candidate. I have none.
Okay, thank you.
Question number 7, what is the basis for your public office decisions?
The basis, can you please clarify that question, because I can think of a lot of ways to interpret that.
I can repeat the question.
Okay. Well, then you don't have to repeat it. I heard what is the basis for my public office decisions? I'm going to interpret that the way that I believe you intend it. The number one basis is the United States Constitution. I believe that the United States Constitution was a brilliantly conceived document that was developed by men who put many years of effort and study into it and were extremely conscientious about it. And although, of course, there, rightfully have been amendments to it since its inception, I think that what's happened is it's been distorted. For instance, like in this administrative law issue, it's been distorted and taken advantage of, and I think that we've got to get back more to the original intent of the United States Constitution. For example, and this is not under the purview of the Railroad Commission, but the 17th Amendment in 1913 reduced the powers of states tremendously by making United States senators elected by the general public instead of by state legislatures. Now, there were reasons why at the time that seemed like a good idea. The fact of the matter is that it weakened the powers of states tremendously, and I believe that states were the fundamental unit of government, not the most elementary unit, but they were the basic unit of government in the original founding of the Federation. It's a federation of states, and to weaken the powers of states was a very bad mistake, and I think that should be corrected. Not that a railroad commissioner could correct that, but I would really like to see that corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 8, what does the Railroad Commission do, and how will you communicate that to the public during the campaign and after being elected?
I see the Railroad Commission's functions in really two components. One of them is kind of an administrative function where you more or less adjudicate disputes between parties that want to drill here or drill there or get permits for this or that. It also does something that is, I think, very interesting in that administrative function, and that is it can license companies to modify automobile engines or other reciprocating engines to run on natural gas as compared to running on gasoline or diesel. I think that's a very important capability of the Railroad Commission, because I believe that we in Texas have got literally hundreds of years of natural gas available to us, and that reserve of natural gas is actually increasing, because every day that technology moves forward, we're able to tap more and more of what is under the ground here. And I would like to see Texas energy independent, and then I'd like to see Texas lead the country to be energy independent. Natural gas is the easiest, cleanest, most efficient way to do that. And one of the things that I will do is I will promote licensing. And of course, there's a lot of battling with the EPA because they're the most difficult issue with these conversions to run on natural gas. Even though natural gas runs much cleaner, natural gas actually has a higher octane rating than gasoline. You can get more power out of an engine with no emissions to speak of. And you know, I believe that that is a very important direction that which we should move into. Another problem that that solves in an ancillary way is that the price of natural gas now is even dips below $2, which makes it uneconomical even to pump out of the ground. And by creating more of a market for this huge reserve, we can normalize the price per MCF.
Thank you.
Question number 9. What is the scope of the Railroad Commission in maintaining status quo or opening the field to alternative energy sources to update power generation?
The scope is limited to using the natural resources from the ground. In other words, oil, gas, uranium, and mining products. One of the things that Texas has done, which I strongly disagree with, is the windmills to generate electricity. I think that they are not even a good joke. These windmills are advertised to produce a megawatt of power each. If you happen to own a windmill and if you get 10% of that output, you have one of the top windmills in the state. If you could get 10% of the advertised output from that windmill, you are really, very fortunate. These windmills, even if they were to produce the full advertised output, you consume hundreds and hundreds of acres of good land with these ugly, noisy, dangerous windmills, whereas on a 10-acre plot you could build a combined cycle gas-fired electric plant that is clean, produces virtually no emissions. The output is warm air, not even hot, warm air, and operates cleanly, whether there's wind, whether there's sun, day or night. It doesn't make any difference. So I think a lot of the things that have been done for political reasons, not practical reasons. And I intend to promote the things that work practically. I'm not interested in what sounds good on your resume, like you produced 10,000 windmills.
This is going to be your last question. This is question number 10. Do you have any thoughts for a higher office at any time?
I do not. I am 66 years old now, and I intend to win a 2-year seat, which is the remaining unexpired term, and then I intend to run one time. By that time, I'm not interested in working. I would like to retire. I've got kids, I've got grandkids. I've already retired once from my business, and I thought I was retired, but then I got pulled back into to becoming active and working again. This is something I'm doing as a mission. Frankly, if I did not have children and grandchildren, I would not do this punishment that I'm doing. I would just say, look, I can last out the rest of my time and go. But I've got to do this because of my kids and your kids, that they're going to have to live with what we leave. And our fathers and our forefathers left us a free country that was the most powerful, most admired nation on earth. And it just is criminal for us to leave them the shambles that we are leaving them. And it's because of, a lot of people blame the Democrats, a lot of people blame the liberals, and yeah, they intentionally have done this. But my biggest blame is for the good people who know better, who didn't stop it. People who were too lazy to be involved, people who just let it happen. That's the real problem. And, Edmund Burke said, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Well, a lot of good men and good women did nothing or not enough, and that's why I'm running.